I will let you go. I will let you go ahead and take over, and we're looking forward to hearing from you today.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that very, very kind introduction. And just to be clear, I don't lead those programs at MPH, but I'm part of those programs at MPH, which is a wonderful opportunity for me. So thank you all for coming this morning to hear about this project. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I initially entitled this "Have It This Way: Development of an App to Help Teens Make Healthy Choices at Fast Food Venues." And the app that I'm speaking about is our Health Kick Plus app, a culturally tailored app to prompt healthy choices at the point of purchase. And I want to point out that there are a lot of people involved in this here in the CHEAR Center, Anna and Juliet, and when Chantel was with us. And then we have students, Aria and Megan, and a lot of Europe students. Ken Resnikow, David Cordova have our consultants on the project. And then we have the team that we work with out of Minnesota for the development. So the idea behind this, as many of you will know, is to send these just prompts at the point of purchase. So you're walking into your McDonald's, you're thinking about having breakfast, and the app would send you a healthy choice for you to consider. But as I think about the development of this app, I feel a more appropriate title is "A Series of Unfortunate Events and How We Address Them." I don't know if many of you are familiar with this particular story, but if you do, you know it's these children who, it starts off with a very unfortunate event of losing their parents in an untimely fire. They are taken in by a quote uncle who does dreadful things like try to marry the teenage daughter, and then it's just a series of other horrible things that happen. But every time something horrible happens, the oldest sister ties back her hair, and they all together make their way through until they encounter the next dreadful thing. So I'm going to talk about of the things that we've encountered with the development of this app and some of the approaches we've tried to take to address them. So as a bit of background, we had a weight management program at U of M called Empower, and I suppose that was one of the earlier unfortunate events, which I didn't include in this, but that closed. But as part of that intervention, we've done a lot of studies using text messaging exploring text messaging, like one of the first projects or places to try that for weight management for adolescents. And so we had data from that, and we were able to use it to get an STTR phase 1 grant, because the kids had said to us, yes, these messages are very interesting, they're great, it'd be better if we got them when we were actually making food choices. And so we thought, when you're in eating venues, that's what we should try. And so we got the grant to be able to do the proof of concept to develop this app. And that went fairly well, but it takes a while. It took a while for the RFA to come out for the next phase. And in that intervening time, the technology used in the initial project became obsolete. So that was a real challenge. It was not what we anticipated at all. But with that being the case, we did sort of try to make lemons out of that, lemonade out of the lemons. And so we used the data as pilot data for an R21 and ultimately for the STTR when that came out. And then the challenges really began. If we think about the nutrition side of this, so we didn't know, of course, which fast food restaurants to include, but that was an easy one to solve. We did focus groups with adolescents. in the areas that we were focusing on for the R21, which were Flint, Detroit, and Benton Harbor, with the thought that these are areas that have many children are living in obesogenic environments. And so we did focus groups there, and one of the things we asked them was where they eat fast food most often. And so you won't be surprised to know that McDonald's was number one, and then here are the others that hit in the top 10. So we wanted to suggest food and calculate how many calories they purchase from these restaurants when they go, because the idea was that by using this app, the number of calories they purchased over time and the number of times they visited these restaurants would decrease over time. But unfortunately, calorie calculation was much more difficult than we first imagined. So we assumed we would use a database, and at least we planned to use a database. We had it all planned out that we could do it this way. But the databases that are available don't have options for all of the menu items, which is surprising, but you can't find all the menu items. Above and beyond that, they have calorie data that doesn't match the calorie data from the restaurants that when the restaurants provide those calorie data. So then which one do you believe? I guess you believe the restaurant one, but now your database has a different number. And then there wasn't the ability to customize. So a lot of what we do is to say, consider having this without the mayo or without the cheese, etc. But we wouldn't be able to work out, well, how many calories from the cheese. So if we remove that, well, how many calories is the item now? So to solve this problem, Anna came to the rescue, and we created what I like to call our Kaufman calorie calculator, where we included all of the items that were at the restaurants that we were interested in, and their drop-down boxes. So you can go to Burger King, and then you can choose the breakfast items from Burger King, and then you can deal with all of the substitutions that might be available or possible within that breakfast, in the breakfast menu, and come out with the calories and count them. And would you believe the cheese on one sandwich is different from the cheese on a different sandwich in the same restaurant for the same type of item. But yeah, so with that, we were able to find a way to be able to calculate the calories. So now we can do that. We needed to know, of course, which foods to include in that calculator. And the problem there is that the rating scales that are available just essentially say that, well, all the food in these fast food venues are unhealthy. So how do you know which ones to you could offer or suggest more often? And also we wanted to be able, if somebody typically is eating a double bacon cheeseburger mac, I don't know, whatever, we don't want to go from that to telling them to eat a salad with no dressing. The likelihood of them making that leap is next kin to nothing. So we wanted to be able to grade the foods so we could gradually move them along that continuum. So with that, we created our evaluation of nutrients in fast food scale, otherwise known as the enough scale. And Chantal was key to creating this scale. And what we did here was to remove all the really processed foods and things that we thought couldn't possibly suggest. And then we also removed the sugar sweetened beverages and juices, because we also just couldn't bring ourselves to suggest those. Items greater than 500 calories were out. Those with more than 20 grams of fat were out. And the illustrations are of things that meet those requirements. So this particular sandwich would not be suggested because it has more than 20 grams of fat. And then things with more than 20 grams of sugar were also out. So for example, if we had this mac chicken with no mayo, we would then rate it in 5 categories on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being least healthy to 5 being the most healthy. and give a score in each of those areas. So calories, fat, sugar, fiber, and vitamins and minerals. And then we would find the average score for that. And then we divided those with the following criteria. If they were less than 1.4, they were most favorable. Then we had our intermediate range and then our least favorable range. And that is how we then categorized all the food. And just to mention, anything with a calorie count between 400 and 500 calories, or with the higher end of the fat grams, those went into the least favorable category as well. So this is an example of some of the foods from McDonald's and how they came out in that, with that scale. So you would notice that the salad and the apple slices, but not just those, there were some sandwiches that came out into the most favorable category, typically with some kind of modification. So the egg white delight, but with no ham. And then you'd see that would work its way up to where we could have a quarter pounder recommended or a McDouble, but you'd have to make some modifications to those things. So the question then becomes, how do we get teens to have it our way? How do we get them to have a side salad with only half the package of low-fat dressing, or a mac chicken with no mayo, or a quarter pounder with no cheese, or any of the 641 other food suggestions that we have created? Well, we hoped to do it with some persuasive messages and images. Well, as you might imagine, that presents some challenges. But we had some information from our previous studies, so we knew some of the factors that we had to take into account. So we knew that that the content could, in fact, prompt high calorie intake. Right. So in our previous studies, we had learned that if we said to a kid, instead of French fries, have, I don't know, let me not try that one. Instead of ice cream, have a frozen yogurt. Once they heard ice cream, that's all they could think of. They really didn't want to think about the frozen yogurt. And so we had to remove from all of our messages anything that made reference to a very high calorie thing, because that was all that would trigger them. So we had to be careful not to have content that did the opposite of what we wanted, and prompted food intake. We also realized that we had to use language that wasn't too casual, because they were like, well, this is from your doctor, so it shouldn't sound like your friend that's speaking to you, which of course gave us our fun title from one of our previous papers with OMG, don't say LOL. And so we took that advice to heart. And then they wanted tips for healthy food options. They really liked some direct suggestions of exactly what to do, which goes quite against the current wisdom that motivational interviewing is sort of a really good way of helping to impact change. And so we tried to build motivational interviewing into the messages, but there's some, not really sure on that, because the MI messages, they were somewhat more likely to say, please just tell us what to do, rather than ask us what we think or have us reflect. So we took on board the fact that they liked the direct instructions, but we don't know whether they will work very, very well. So rather than go one way or the other, we've included both, just to be safe. We wanted to know how much information to provide, because a lot of people are concerned that if we spent too much time focusing on calories, that this would make the kids want to count calories more, and that could be detrimental. So we wondered if we're, again, our burger with no mayo or a chicken sandwich with no mayo, we asked them, which message do you prefer? Craving a sandwich, try a mac chicken without mayo. Or craving a sandwich, try a mac chicken without mayo. Cuts out 100 calories and half the fat. Which one would they gravitate towards? And so we found that they preferred the messages, more information, telling them about why something was healthy. And so, for example, one of our favorite quotes was, the young lady said, gives me some real deal insight. You need a reason to eat that dry. We didn't really realize it would be interpreted that way, but she's right. I mean, I suppose it might be dry, or at least drier than without the mayo. Another quote was, you have to look at your calories and look at what you're eating because one could have more fat. And so we have incorporated more information into the messages than we would have done prior to this work. We wondered if humor would work. We thought we need something to keep them engaged in the messaging. And so we had a youth advisory board, and we learned from them that a little bit of humor, some slight wit was okay, no actual jokes, because we would get it wrong. But something like this, where we say, want to trim the fat and calories from your meal, consider using a lower calorie option like ketchup instead. And there's a sister cutting her brother's hair. So that kind of thing was interesting to them. So we worked very hard at incorporating that into the messages. And regarding images, we already knew from previous work that they should reflect the teens that are of similar ages, not people who are much older or importantly, not much younger, have a natural appearance that was preferred over a staged look, and images should reflect the participants and have diversity. Well, once I mentioned diversity, you might notice that would present a problem, and we'll get to that. The parents, we hadn't previously known what parents thought, and so we did focus groups with them. They wanted the images to look cool, and they thought that the images should show the food suggestion, which, as I mentioned, could be a challenge because we don't want to trigger them. So even if we're suggesting a sandwich with or if we're suggesting small fries, showing the picture of the fries might trigger them to eat more. So we have to balance that idea. And we really tend to show more of the food suggestions when it's sort of vegetables that we're suggesting. But regardless, we do show some of the food suggestions. And then they, again, wanted the idea of diversity so that the children could see themselves in the images. Well, there are, as you could imagine, limitations in the diversity of commercially available images. And that is diversity as it relates to ethnicity, but also in relation to the size of the youth in the images. We certainly tend to find just very lean models, which is challenging. And so to address this, we applied for and received a supplement to create a more diverse picture library. And so we're partnering with an after-school program in Detroit to get images, and now including images taken during the pandemic. So that is of help. And as we think about the images, that brings us to the cultural tailoring of the messages. So we know that cultural tailoring makes a difference, that tailoring to ethnic groups enhances personal relevance and behavior change. And we know that a more nuanced tailoring to ethnic identity works for adults. And I'm showing you the difference that like not all African Americans are sort of the same in outlook or preferences. And I've shown two examples of maybe very different, that you tailor differently to, that you do the tailoring differently. But we don't know if the same is true for adolescents. And so for this, we use the multi-ethnic identity scale, which is a 12-item validated measure to assess ethnic identity. And it has been validated in youth. And it assesses the ethnocentricity of the respondent. And it does it on a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being low and 4 being high. And so we administered this measure to the children in the focus groups in Detroit, Flint, and Benton Harbor. And we found a median ethnic identity score of 3.4. And so we used that to dichotomize our group into low and high Afrocentricity. And with that, we then looked at the kinds of images that participants preferred. And we found those images that were selected more by those with a higher EI score and those that were preferred by those with a lower EI score. And we then tailor our messaging, our images to participants' ethnic identity score. We also tailor to the menu options at the sites that they're going to time of day. So we have different suggestions depending on the time of day that they're entering a venue. And then we also tailor to their food preferences. So we include all of those levels of tailoring, and we tailor to language. And here I just have to give a shout out to Juliet, who has translated every one of these messages into Spanish. And you might think that that sounds fairly simple, but not at all, because one has to decide whether or not you should do it generically so that all of, and I should let Juliet explain this, whether all of you use the O at the end as opposed to using O for boys, for male, and A for female, but we don't tailor to gender, or do you put all of them O/A/X? So there's a lot of, and then there's some words that really just don't translate into Spanish well. Apparently, crispy does not translate well. And can you imagine how many times you use crispy when you're talking about vegetables? So yeah, Juliet, phenomenal job of translating this all into Spanish so we can offer it to Spanish speakers. And we also tailor to their interests. And I'll tell you more about that as we move forward. So with that about the messaging, I want to go to our real major, the challenge that I think we have not really solved incredibly well. So as you remember, the point here is to get the users the message once they are in the eating venue, not while they're outside, because we do not want to encourage them to eat when they were not going to eat in the first place. So we did a lot of testing, hours of testing in the snow in Michigan. I don't know why, it was always in the winter when we were testing, to see what geofencing radius we needed to use. And so we were down to either 25 meters or 50 meters as the radius. And so out of 125 tests, we found that the marker knew accurately where the user was 70% of the time when we were testing with androids. And then we also knew that out of these 125 tests, that the users, or the testers, were sent a notification 84% of the time, again, using androids. And so when we looked at whether they were getting the notifications in the restaurant versus outside, at 50 meters, we were getting about 40% of these messages were coming outside of the restaurant. Whereas when we put the radius at 25 meters, then we were pretty certain that they were getting the messages inside. I will mention that at 25 meters, while the messages would come inside and not outside, a lot of the time messages were not sent. So we ended up with a sweet spot of 37.5. We just went down the middle and said, okay, here we can get messages delivered most of the time and most of the time inside. So we did all that testing with the Android. We were fairly good to go. And then we realized that most young people have iPhones. So we'd already said we were going to convert this to iPhones. And we started that earlier than we would have otherwise when we had that realization. But unfortunately, the detection technology did not work sufficiently well with the iOS. We just have not been able to solve that. And so we partnered with Plot Projects, which is a system that many people use when location is required for businesses. But the problem is that their goal, and most people's, why people go to Plot Projects, is because they want to drive people into their business. If you're anywhere in the vicinity of a Target, you want people to know there's a Target over there, go there, which is absolutely the opposite of what we want to do. So while they have great detection capability, they're not able to use a radius at 25 meters or even 37 meters. We have to go beyond 50 meters. And so we were getting messages driving by on the highway to tell people to go into McDonald's, which clearly was suboptimal. And so what we've tried to do is to combine the two systems so that when the Plot Project system will be the one that identifies, oh, you're near a McDonald's, but rather than sending the message at that point, that will wake up our system that will then try to implement, well, okay, are you within this 50-meter radius, and are you staying in that space and not moving, and then send the notification. In order not to sound like this was the whole thing had so many problems, I think I've left out some of the problems, but I'll mention one of them here, which was the battery life. Because in order to do this really well, it was draining batteries, and like nobody's going to keep an app on their phone if it drains their battery. So that's partly why we went to Plot Projects, because they have a better way of doing this without draining the battery. And then if ours only turns on when theirs has realized that we're close to one of these restaurants, then we could hopefully allow some battery saving feature. It'll be a battery saving feature and allow the youth to keep it on their phone. So with that, we wanted to build in some engagement features as well. And what I've described to you so far is the location-based messages, right? So there's a lot of the tailoring, etc., but it's all about being triggered by location. But we also have the ability in the app to just trigger based on time. And so we can send messages just because we know what time it is, or we've decided to send a message at that time, and it can have the same level of tailoring, etc. And so for that, we decided to send daily messages on a number of topics that come from the topics that we typically address within the weight management program. So sugary beverages, fruits and vegetables, breakfast, fiber, exercise, screen time, sleep. And we built in these themes that I mentioned to you earlier. And so the youth have, of course, interests outside of just healthy eating, which may not even be their biggest interest. And so we found that they're interested in sustainability, so in the environment and things of that nature. They're interested in body positive messages to help esteem, and they're interested in they report being under a lot of stress, and so they were interested in ways to lower their stress. And so we attempted to write messages that would speak to some of those themes while addressing the topic, that one of the topics that's listed on the top. And then we wrote them in different tones. So we had the direct messages that will tell somebody just to do something, the motivational interviewing messages that will ask them to reflect on it or think about how something might happen. And then we have what we call our edgy messages, where we try to be, don't know if many of you know about the messages about not smoking, where it speaks about sort of the man out to get you. And young people like to fight back against the man. And so we try to have edgy messages. Those were incredibly hard to write. I'm not sure that we've hit those very well, but nonetheless, we tried. And so here's an example of a beverage message that's direct and that's about sustainability. So drink water from a reusable bottle before, during, and after exercising. And so it's good for you and for our environment. And hopefully they're all interested in it because it's about the environment, but it's also prompting them to drink water. We have messages every Friday that just go out on a particular time, where we send them ideas of recipes that they might try. As we anticipated, these are very popular with those who have tested the app. We also engaged parents because parents, we know, are important to any adolescent making changes. And interestingly, the youth frequently said that they are often not the ones buying the fast foods, that in fact, it's their parents who buy it for them. And so we incorporated a option for the parents to get messages. And we also built in goals and rewards. So the youth get to negotiate with their parent about a reward they can get if they hit their goal. And their goal could be, for example, to incorporate more vegetables when they go to eat fast food. And then they negotiate with the parent what goal to get. So Juliet made this video to show what the app looks like. So let's run this here. There we go. There we go. So we have our daily tips here just on, and this one is about stress and vegetables. So they get a daily tip every day. And if they go to the message center, they will get, if they are in a restaurant and there's no message, then they can ask for one. But here the message, here are the restaurants that we have in our data set. And if there's, like, we have an other, so if it's something, a place that isn't on our list, they can still get messages from there. And so when they're in there, they'll get a message. If they're in Panera, they get this message. They can take a picture of their food, which is how we get to know how many calories they purchase. So Julia just took a picture of nothing there, but it would be hopefully of their food, and they would submit it. And then they can tell us a little bit more about what they purchased so that we can calculate the calories that are in there more accurately. So sometimes it's hard to tell just from the packaging what they've bought, but they can add the details that would make it, and then they can tell us like how healthy they think their choice is. And we use that to help us send them a tailored message afterwards. We ask them how close they were to reaching their goal and then tell them congratulations, or you're almost there. And then if they want sort of tips about how to do better at reaching their goal, they want some tips about reflecting on the goal, and we can give them a tip that's related to that. And so that's what the app looks like for the team. And I think, I think this video is also going to show how about their setting a personal venue. So if there's a restaurant that isn't in the app, then they can go to this part of the app and add it in. All they have to do is click on add a location, and it can go to either where they are, or they can add the location even when they're not there. They just put the marker over wherever that restaurant might be. And if they add it to their list, then whenever they go back to that restaurant, they will get a message when they walk in there, assuming that the location function works. then they will get a message when they go to that location. And then, as I mentioned, they can set a goal. And so they have a goal, they have a reward. That in this case, they're removing something unhealthy from their order. And if they do, they'll get a picnic. They'll get to go on a picnic with their parent. They can choose whatever that their reward is. And then they get a weekly report on how well they were doing. They get a monthly report that compares how they've been doing over the past month. And then they get a report that tells them about their rewards and when it's time to get the reward from their parent and to set a new one. So as I mentioned, this is what the teen will see when they go into their app. And then just to show you here for the parent app, this is what they get. So they get the very same daily tip that the teen would have gotten, so they would have received. So they see what the teen received. If they enter an eating venue, then they're asked if they're there with the teen, or whether they're going to be buying food for the teen. And so the parents, if they are going to be buying food for the teen, then they can also select where they are, and they would get the very same message the teen would have gotten at that time as well. So that they will be prompted in just the same way to consider buying something healthy for the teen. Hopefully that will allow the teen to get something that's better than the parents would have bought otherwise. The parents are not asked to take the picture. The young people are supposed to take the picture when they get it, and so that we can work out what they ate. They also engage in the goal setting and reward. They have to agree with the reward because they're often the ones who are going to be giving it. And so if they agree, then the reward is set, and that's what the young person will get. Well, hopefully that's what the young person will get when they reach their goals. And they also get to see how the teen is doing. They get the report. So that was a bit of a challenging decision, whether to show the parents the report as well, whether the teen would feel like the parents are sort of spying on them. But I think from the focus groups and from the advisory board, it was agreed that the parents should get to see this and then get to be able to give sort of encouragement to the teen for doing so well. So that's what the app looks like currently. And we planned to enter recruitment, but COVID definitely hampered that. And so we really were stumped for a while. But what we decided to do was add the option to get a message when ordering from home. So now you don't have to trigger these messages by being in the eating venue. We changed to remote recruitment because we were recruiting in after-school programs and at churches, etc. But we realized we couldn't do that anymore, and so we're doing we had to change everything into a remote format, and which you can imagine throws a real spanner in the works with measuring height and weight and getting accurate measurements there. We've shortened the duration of the intervention because of all the delay with these the project, and we hope to finish by July of this year. But you know, what else could go wrong? So with that, I'm going to pause because I want to take questions. I'll open it up for questions at this point.
Hey, Susan. This is really, really interesting work. I have a question about potential unintended effects of this app. And I think the main one is, I wonder if there's any way in which this app could, I don't know, falsely reinforce the notion that fast food is okay. Essentially, that there's this, that essentially what we, in an ideal world, people would never go into the fast food restaurant in the first place, right? Now, I understand that conditional on the fact that you go to the fast food restaurant, you want to help shut people away from the least favorable choices, which is another comment. I wonder if there's a way that you could frame this as least unhealthy as opposed to most favorable, but that's just a different question. But I mean, is there any evidence from your, I guess, focus groups or even just kind of quantitative data suggesting that the rate of fast food visits might go up, kind of contrary to what you might want?
So that's really interesting. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether this will increase the rate of going to fast food restaurants. I think for the fact that we've put in goals and rewards for not going, I think hopefully counters that, right? So if you don't go, then that means you've achieved your goal. That supersedes any other goal. And so one can get rewards for that. So hopefully by incentivizing not going, we have lessened the likelihood that the app will increase people's odds of going. And then I think that the question about labeling it as least favorable or not, and least healthy, very good point. Definitely will reach. I think that's a great way of labeling it, least healthy and most healthy. We had a struggle with that because we didn't want to say most healthy because we didn't want to say healthy. We couldn't bring ourselves to say healthy and fast food. So if you
most unhealthy, most unhealthy is how I would frame it. I mean, I guess I just
okay.
Is there no quantitative data tracking? Was there any sort of, I guess was there a baseline period before where you had any sort of sense of like number of fast food visits per month? Because I would think that you would be able to quantify number of visits after the app is implemented, right?
Oh, yes. So we will, no, so I should be clear. When I say I don't have an answer, it's like I don't have an answer yet.
Okay.
Because the kids who are enrolled, we have a 2-week baseline where they don't get any messaging, sort of just nothing. It's just like on their phone. And then after 2 weeks, then we start sending the messaging. And so we'll get a baseline for the number of visits, and the app is supposed to, yes, the idea is to be able to tell over time, are they going less often? That's the one outcome. And the other outcome is, are they purchasing fewer calories when they go?
And this is all McDonald's? Sorry, I missed that part.
Sorry, yeah, so I just kept saying McDonald's because one comes to mind, it's their favorite one. No, we have 24 restaurants that are in the data set, and then you can add ones that are not there. So you can add your personal venue, like that we don't know of. If you go to a mom and pop restaurant, you can add that as well.
Yeah, I would be interested in seeing if there's any sort of like mix and case mix, I guess, difference in the types of restaurants people choose. I feel that might be interesting too, in addition to the number, right?
Right. And
maybe people say, oh, McDonald's is not great, but Chipotle, on the other hand, we can go there.
Right. They might do that. They may move to one versus the other. I'm trying to see, Juliet said, also before we enroll anyone into the study, we ask how often. Yes, so that's a really good point. We ask how often participants go to fast food restaurants, and they have to go at least 3 times a week to be in the study. So we don't take people who don't go at all, because the idea is to decrease how often they go. So if they don't go very much, then it's sort of not much point. So yeah, thanks, Juliet, for mentioning that. Mm-hmm. The criteria to be in the study is you have to be 13 to 17 years of age. You have to have, for the R21, you have to have a BMI above the 85th percentile. And you have to, for both of them, you have to eat out at least 3 times a month. For the R21 is African American kids who will have excess weight. For the STTR, which is the one that has the app that has all the bells and whistles that I just showed you, that one, it could be Black, Hispanic, or African American with a BMI above the 50th percentile, who eats out 3 times a week or more, and who has a parent who's willing to participate.
Hey, Susan, it's Kevin. Thanks for this. This is really interesting. Can you just say a little bit more about the top bullet on your slide about the adding the option for, when they are ordering from home? Just say a little bit more about either what you've done or what you're planning on doing there.
Yeah, so when the pandemic hit and people were we were all in lockdown and couldn't go out, it was sort of, well, of course, the pandemic is devastating from so many ways, but for my research, it was devastating because this is all about people going into fast food restaurants. And so with people ordering food more often, we thought, well, they're still ordering from the same places. Can't we send messages to them if they're at home ordering? Now, Anna can speak to this better, because I was like, well, can't we just know when they go into an app to do, like, Uber Eats or one of these other ones, know when they're doing that, and then get our message in so that we could prompt them to make a healthier choice from the restaurant that they are ordering from. Well, apparently, this is terrible in all kinds of ways. And so we can't do that. But if they tell us that if they go into the app and just say, oh, select McDonald's, before that list wasn't there, they had to have walked in and the app would know they're in McDonald's. Now we have this list that they can choose. So you don't have to trigger it by location. You can just choose the restaurant you want, and you will be given a suggestion based on time of day and what's available from that menu and all the other things that I mentioned in the tailoring. Anna, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. It was complicated on a couple of different fronts. One, just from a technical standpoint, it's very difficult to share across different apps, and there are so many different versions of DoorDash, Uber Eats, Eat Street, that it kind of multiplies by a number, like the complexity grows exponentially. But additionally, there's kind of a conflict of interest where the restaurants are not going to, if we said, well, let's partner directly with McDonald's and try to, come up with something there, they're not going to like that we're encouraging people to eat less. So it became very complex. Also, just from a privacy standpoint, if we created some kind of connections between our apps, where are the limits, and do they have access to this location data, it became unworkable pretty quickly.
Yeah, it just strikes me that this could be a sort of area of continued interest, just because following the pandemic, who knows what's going to happen, but it could be to some respect or in some respect a part of the new normal. More ordering from online, that sort of thing. So I think that's important to keep working on that. I really appreciate your stick-to-itiveness, as we say, of all the challenges you've encountered along the way, because this is just yet another one. But it seems like it's worthy of continued attention. So I like that idea. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And the issue of the pandemic has that. I know we only have a couple minutes. I'll mention that I figure after all of the work that's gone into this messaging, maybe there are other ways that we can use the app and use the messaging. And so there's like idea to do a project with a community engaged group who want to send messaging through faith-based groups to help them make healthy choices. So we could create messages that are faith-based and partner with this group, and they can use the app, because all they have to do, we've done the technology is done. All they have to do is change the messaging and can deliver it to their group. Or we've thought about doing messaging around COVID. And so to the extent that the location work, one could, we know you're by a petrol station, tell you to, use your hand sanitizer. We can give you messaging around COVID and wearing a mask. We can use that EMA part to send questions about whatever we might want to. And of course, there is that dyad component where we can have messaging between you and between the parents and the children. So maybe there are other areas where we can incorporate messaging, or the app could be used to deliver messaging in other settings. And so hopefully we'll explore those as well in the future.
Susan, there's a question in the chat from Gary. What impact are you hoping to have, and is there a threshold of effect to call it effective?
So yes, we wanted to try to decrease the calorie consumption by 220 calories per week purchased at fast food venues, which we arrived at based on the average number of calories purchased at fast food restaurants by youth. So if we're able to actually do that, then we would say that we were successful. At this point, I guess there are a couple of levels of success. One is getting the app to actually work correctly. I didn't envision that would be a major issue, but that is the biggest issue at the moment. And because we may or may not reach that level of success, but if we do, then the next level is, can we reduce the number of calories purchased, as I mentioned.
It's 9:55, so I'm going to give anyone that wants to head out the permission to go, but I'll leave it open if anyone wants to stay around for a few more minutes. But Susan, thank you so much for sharing this and for the deliberate way in which you've approached this and also communicated with us about that. So thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll leave it open, but have a great rest of your day.